Hey everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to the Division 2. Today I want to look ahead towards Brooklyn. With Year 6 Season 1 of the game wrapping up just this past week, we now officially only have one season left to go before it'll finally be time to get our hands on the game's upcoming DLC set in Brooklyn, New York. Now, in case you want a recap on everything we know about this DLC, including the size we expect it to be, whether or not it will be paid, details like that, I made that exact video just recently. I will link it in the upper corner and down in the description in case you want to check it out. But today specifically, I want to hone in on the story aspect and implications for this upcoming chapter in the Division saga, because thanks to some new information we were given with the Year 6 Season 1 finale, as well as past details and teases that have been looming for quite some time, I think we can begin to lay out an overall framework of where things might be headed. Of course, we won't know for certain until it's boots on the ground and we're playing it, but as far as the general premise, the ending, and setup for the Division 3 down the road, believe it or not, we might have a rough outline for all of that. So, we'll waste no further time and get right to it. One thing I did want to very clearly mention here at the start, however, is that this video will contain full spoilers from two different sources. Firstly, the Division 2 story itself, obviously. If you are not caught up to the ending of Year 6 Season 1 First Rogue, then be warned. But also, I will be referencing details from the Division Crossroads novel trilogy in this video. I've been getting requests to kind of tie everything together here, as that series runs parallel to the game's current timeline and story, and there are some very juicy and revealing details in there. So if you haven't read those books and you think you at all might want to, then just know that this video will contain spoilers from Recruited, Compromised, and Hunted. But with that said, and without further ado, let's get into this. Alright, to begin, let's just establish that we know at least a vague premise of what this DLC is going to be about, and thanks to information released this past week, likely what one of our first objectives in Brooklyn will be. Firstly, we have this quote from Yannick, the Division 2's creative director, from an interview he did back at the start of Year 6. I covered this in a previous video a while back, but take a listen to this clip of him speaking to what the overall story arc for this year will be about.
We're continuing the story, and we've been doing that for the past few years already. And as you may have seen with the trailer we just released, with this season, we are actually going after Keener, who we found out in the last season that he survived the events of Warlands of New York. He actually faked his own death. He's back. But with a twist, because he's back, but he's not necessarily your enemy. He wants to talk. So this is what this season is going to be about. It's going after him to meet and try to hear what he has to say and see if we can maybe find a potential ally with us. And we will keep building on that story, and all of that is going to lead us into the DLC that we'll be releasing later in the year. So there's going to be a lot of story.
So, as you heard him say, we've of course now seen how Year 6 Season 1 played out, and Yannick states that this storyline will continue to build and lead us into the DLC coming in Year 6 Season 3. So the conflict with ourselves, Keener, Kelso, etc. against the Black Tusk and the Hunters, that's the main driver that they're setting up. With that down, let's then cover what our first steps might look like once we arrive. And that, from what we know, seems like it will be meeting up with the growing resistance that's already there. What do I mean? Well, it was first established a while back that Keener and Theo Parnell saved a group of civilians, providing them transport by boat off of Manhattan. And one of their underlying goals and hopes with this was to begin seeding the thought and sentiment that rogue agents maybe aren't as bad as they're made out to be. We then heard this season that Keener tasked Melanie Hoskins, an agent we met in the Division Hearts on Fire audiobook, with helping him establish a command center, a base of operations if you will, for their growing movement. And thanks to a message he leaves us during our trials this season, it seems as though he's ready to show off what he's been working on. Here it is.
Congratulations. Looks like it's time for a status update. You've officially passed the test. After everything you've been through, I know it must be hard to trust that this isn't a trick, that we are on the same side. You want proof? I can show it to you. We've got Cal's roster and what we've set up in Brooklyn. I think you'll be impressed. Well, Agent, if you're ready to meet, I'll send the coordinates and be waiting with your signing bonus.
And if that wasn't enough for you, a great compliment to that is actually to read Keener's description within the Manhunt menu this season. I think a lot of people forget that this is a thing, and to be fair, it's been much less relevant since we've moved away from having dedicated targets for the lieutenant slots, but I highly recommend you read Keener's here before the season concludes. It's a detailed recounting of who his character is, what his arc has been, but this last paragraph is what I want to focus on. It reads, Rogue agents continued after his death across the nation. After Agent Kelso returned to the Haven settlement in Lower Manhattan, he came out of hiding for a new mission, to recruit more people to fight against the Black Tusk and Cal's hunters. Once they know the truth about what the opposition is planning, they will see that he was right. So what we can take from all of that is that ever since his death, quote unquote, Keener's been working from the shadows to build a resistance and movement, one that doesn't view him nor his fellow rogues as villains, but rather share a commonality. They all see the work that Natalia and Cal are doing as an existential threat to life as they know it. So what I believe will happen is that upon arriving in Brooklyn, I'm sure after some heroic fight, we'll be taken to the secret hideout and base, and we'll get to see for ourselves how strong of a group Keener has amassed. And my personal hope, in theory, based off of what we've heard, is that Melanie Hoskins will be one of the leaders there, ready to take the fight to the enemy. After this, and for the meat of the DLC's content, of course we're going to have to wait and see what's in store. If this war is going to be at the scale we expect it to be, I hope there are some big battles, some epic fights. One clue we have is that Barton Schaefer is likely maybe going to be involved, assuming he wakes up by then, as it's been stated many times that he is the key, literally. He's one of the only surviving BTSU members with biometric access to some of the Black Tusk's most secure compounds. So I could totally see a mission where our agent, Barton, and maybe a few others sneak into one of those for reasons yet unknown. But in general, I expect things to be high stakes and high octane. What I want to do now, however, is shift focus towards the end of this DLC, because while we'll have to wait and see what happens in the middle, and just how hectic things get, I think we can pretty safely rule out a few endings to this that won't happen, and count on a few events that might. Let me explain. This is where we now shift to information from the Division Crossroads novels, and why those are relevant is twofold. For one, you have direct crossovers. For instance, Natalia Sokolova being a character that interacts with Myra in the third book, Hunted, but perhaps more importantly, the timeline. The first book, Recruited, occurs between September and October in 2016, which was around the time of seasons 9, 10, and 11 for the Division 2. Compromised, the second book, then takes a huge leap, happening in April of 2017, so a whole 5 months out from the current timeline of the Division 2. And then Hunted, the third and final book, takes another small jump, ultimately concluding in August of 2017, 9 months removed from where we're at in the game's timeline right now. The first significant implication of this is that the final pages of Hunted contain an epilogue featuring Natalia Sokolova and Calvin McManus. This confirms that neither of those characters will die in the Brooklyn DLC, so that's huge on its own and we'll discuss further shortly. But the other big note here is that because Compromised and Hunted take place in the future, that means that the characters within them and the state of the world may have knowledge or have had events happen that we have not yet experienced in the Division 2's timeline. And this is important for one key detail that is mentioned in both of those books. That being what looks to be a pretty major shakeup coming to the Division's purpose and directive as an organization. As stated, this is brought up more than one time, but I'll just give you the last reference made to it from the Division Hunted in Chapter 6. It reads, Colin spoke up. That's what she's trying to tell you. We're trying to prevent another mess from happening. We're trying to be proactive here, and if you help us, we'll all be glad of it in the long run. The man gave him a dirty look. If it was that important, it wouldn't be the Division handling it now, would it? Who do you work for again? Exactly? What operational authority do you have? So, interesting, huh? And again, this wasn't a one-off reference. This same event and snag is brought up across the Division Compromised and Hunted. And it's odd because as of right now in the game, this isn't a dilemma. Even though things are weird these days with the president dead and McManus ascending the ranks, the Division still operates under Directive 51 and by the law of the United States. This would suggest that in the future timeline for this world, that is no longer the case. And while there is no confirmation that that major switch will happen during the DLC, I think it's a pretty solid bet to say that it will, especially considering that we're going to be going after McManus and entering into conflict with him, the Hunters, Natalia, and the Black Tusk. Him pulling out a wild card and saying, hey, as commanding authority over the Division, I hereby order you all to cease your current objectives and deactivate, essentially. It's definitely plausible. And of course, it would be a hard command for us to follow given what we know his motives really are. So with all of those things in mind, this is where my mind leads to. I think as of right now, in-game, the odds are looking alright, or at the very least, morale is high. We've got Aaron Keener, mostly, probably, on our side. We're raiding bunkers to grab tech for Anna and to expand the Rogue network. They're digging up intel on Diamond. There's supposedly an army assembling to fight alongside us in Brooklyn. It might seem like this DLC is coming in to finish off the storyline, but because of those things we just covered, I'm not so sure. I gave this analogy on stream, and that's that if anything, I now expect the Brooklyn DLC to play out more like The Empire Strikes Back compared to Return of the Jedi. If you know Star Wars, then hopefully that makes sense. But essentially, I don't think the stage is being set for a big finale. I think the characters will head in expecting to finish the job, but between our authority being stripped or otherwise challenged, and with Natalia and Cal making it out alive, I just think that the scales might not be tipped in our favor. And while I fully expect this to be a big and pivotal moment in the overall storyline, I really do believe that if anything, the Brooklyn DLC will serve as a season finale for an otherwise ongoing TV show. and that the series finale may likely one day be the Division 3, at least in terms of this story's arc. And that heading into that game, maybe we're doing so battered and broken without the law on our side, or maybe even our tech, and then ultimately it will be up to us to throw together one final assault to take down these nemesis. But in the meantime, as I said, I still fully expect the Brooklyn DLC to be meaningful and important to the overall arc. If it is as conflict-oriented as we're expecting, then we could fully end up seeing character deaths of some longtime favorites. Maybe it'll even be the final real end for Keener. Or maybe Kelso's decisions end up costing her life, siding with the enemy, quote-unquote. Many, many directions they could go here. And with those details, my friends, I hope you are beginning to paint together your own outline of how this might all play out. Might not be 100% the same as mine, and that's totally fine. But yeah, with everything we've learned, I just wanted to come on and talk about it all a little bit, because, as stated, we've only got one season left to go now before it's time to join the fight. That's all I've got for you today, my friends. I very much hope you enjoyed watching. Any and all thoughts or theories you may have brainstormed while watching, I would love to hear about them down in the comments below if you're at all inclined to share. And as always, I look forward to reading through whatever you've got to say. Appreciate you all tuning in as always, and I will see you all in the next one. Until then, folks, RogueGold.